Hello, everyone. Thank you all very much for coming to this Wednesday webinar from the Portage Network and the Canadian Association of Research Libraries. This webinar is on data summaries, distilling best practices. The long-form description of deposited data is an essential resource for discovery. For searchers, it's the only text field where they can see their keywords in context, and in many federated search engines, it's the only field that consistently appears on the search result page. In this presentation, Dan Phillips will give an overview of the current landscape of many general repositories, including Dataverse on ScholarsPortal, Dryad, Figshare, and Pangaea. He will speak to the use of the long-form summary/abstract field of data in comparison to other types of abstracts. Finally, he'll propose some best practice concepts that aim to help people write effective data summaries. My name is Jennifer Abel. I'll be your host for today. I'm the training coordinator for Portage, and I'd like to acknowledge that the land that I'm speaking to you from is the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, including the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. A couple of housekeeping things before we get started today. You have been muted automatically when you enter the room. This webinar is being recorded, and the chat may be archived for those who are unable to attend. We encourage you to use the latest version of Zoom so that you have access to all of the features, including security updates, but please don't have a Zoom update in the middle of the webinar. Please use the chat feature if you're having technical difficulties or have additional resources to share. And please use the Q&A option to ask questions of the presenter. Questions will be addressed at the end. You may also raise your hand if you wish to ask a question. Questions may be asked in English or French. We do have a code of conduct that we follow here at CARL, which you can find at the link on your screen, and that'll be popped in the chat shortly as well. CARL and the Portage Network are committed to providing a welcoming, safe, and harassment-free environment for its staff, membership, committees, and working groups, as well as for participants, speakers, and organizers of CARL meetings and events. We do not tolerate harassment of any kind. Our presenter today is Dan Phillips, who's a candidate for the Master of Resource and Environmental Management at Dalhousie. He's been researching environmental data management practices. His work aims to increase the research impact of the academic world by making it more accessible in the greater community. He's also a graduate of the Master of Information program at Dalhousie. So a very learned man with us today to talk about data summaries. Dan, the pixelated and virtual floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Jennifer. So this presentation is Data Summaries, Distilling Best Practices, and I am speaking to you from Dalhousie University, which is in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. We are all treaty people. So what is a summary? For the purposes of this talk, I'm using the word summary to describe any text field intended to supply an overview of the contents of a data set. I'm using this word instead of abstract and description to prevent confusion between the abstracts of articles with data sets and other descriptive fields, subjects, file types, etc. I'm speaking about this field in response to data curators being asked for advice. So why is this field important? It's the field that's intended to be human readable. It's the field where search terms can be seen in context, and for federated searches, this is the main field that's being indexed.
Dan, did you want to share your screen?
Oh, yes, I do. That's the one.
There we go.
There we go. A few other definitions for those who are new at working with data sets. The way I'll be using these terms are a repository is a platform in which we store data sets. A deposit is a data set and or collection of data sets and their metadata entered into a repository. And a federated search is a system in which a user can search multiple repositories at the same time. So before we begin, I'd like to know who's attending today. And I understand there's a poll that can pop up here to indicate who are you? We'll just give that a moment.
The results are coming in fast and furious. Oh, now they've slowed down. Last call.
So overwhelmingly librarian, 49%, data specialist, 29%, new researchers, 9%, and seasoned researchers, self-identified, 2%, and 11% of other. Thank you, Jennifer.
You're very welcome.
So if you're joining this talk for prescriptive advice on what to write in a data summary, this isn't quite it, but don't leave. There'll be some discussion at the end of this presentation, and if you're having trouble writing a data summary, your input is valuable. The idea here instead is to take a number of observations, conventions, and the best practices of other fields to develop some guidance for our own use. So observation number one is that repositories don't offer guidance in how to write a summary. Zenodo and Dryad are two data repositories available for open science, regardless of your institutional affiliation, so long as your data meet their terms and you're open to placing them in the public domain. As a data depositor uses Zenodo, they'll see instructions on how to use each metadata field beneath it. And if you can see just underneath the version here, we have optional, most relevant for software and dataset uploads, some instructional text at the bottom of that. Except the description field, which only says required. The Data Dryad form looks similar, that's on the right. In their submission process documentation, this is the only explanation for how to use this field. Figshare is another platform which began as a way of sharing your visualizations and ensuring you get credit for them. Figshare says, describe your detail as well as you can. When you begin typing, it suggests a few goals for your writing. Interpret your research and reproduce it. Methodology, techniques used. Legal and ethical requirements, and it suggests a minimum length of 4 characters. It doesn't speak to discoverability, and based on this, I would assume that people searching for my data are those who want to do the same study that I've just done. Dataverse is a platform largely used by universities. If you're in a Canadian university, you may be familiar with the OCUL instance on ScholarsPortal. These instructions exist both in the ScholarsPortal documentation and the Dataverse North Best Practices Guide. And as a final example, Google Dataset Search is a federated search that will look through these and so many more. It's been around in some form for 2 years now and was released from beta this past January. They offer a guide to people behind repositories to map their fields to this search. Because repositories follow a variety of conventions, Google only requires 2 properties to be mapped to their system: description, or summary, and the title of the deposit. And that's their definition of what a description should contain. So those are some concrete examples of the instructions on the platforms. What about the guidance from metadata schemas? There's a bit.ly link in the lower left corner, bit.ly /DDI lowercase abstract, if you want to see the full guidance that the DDI has to offer for this field. But in short, they suggest that descriptions be unformatted, that major variables be listed, and that the descriptions speak to the purpose, nature, and scope of the data collection, special characteristics, and what questions researchers were attempting to answer when the data were collected. They also suggest that multiple abstracts may be used for the same department, for the same deposit, and that might speak to summaries in different languages, levels of technical proficiency, or disciplines. The Datasite metadata schema states that the description is the most important out of all non-mandatory properties. And they suggest labeling the types of descriptions. They note 2 types should be included for discoverability: abstract and methods. And again, there's a preference for no formatting. So here's a list of some platforms I've looked at: Dryad, Figshare, Pangaea, and Zenodo as public repositories. ScholarsPortal Dataverse as the main academic platform used in Canada. Further for federated Canadian data. Google Dataset, also a federated search. And CCAN is a platform used largely by government open data. Looking at a few of the suggestions made by the metadata schema, which ones of these look at discourage rich text? And we can see that it's about a 50-50 blend of whether rich text is accepted or encouraged or not. The other thing that I've looked at in these platforms is whether summary and methodology are considered separate fields. And generally, there's no separate methodology field, which was in the advice of Datasite. So Pangaea is the only one to hit both of those suggested criteria. Observation 2, searching for data feels different. So I started this presentation by saying that the summary fields are the ones where users can search for keywords and see them in context. But is that always the case? Before looking at data summaries or data repository searches, let's look at a few examples of search result pages to get an idea of what a first-time data searcher would already be used to. Starting with a Google search here, in this screenshot, I searched for the words ichthyosaur diet. From this, we can quickly skim the search results for information we want. And I can see 2 articles talking about the size of what an ichthyosaur can eat, 3 that speak of it eating fish, and I see one of these results speaks about how it finds fish to eat. So depending on the reason for my search, this little snippet could be valuable to me. Likewise, academic journal searches generally show the abstracts, and admittedly, I had to switch from the default search view to show the full abstract for this screenshot. But the same thinking applies. I can skim through several articles quickly to find the information that I want. So returning to dataset searches, in Figshare, there's no summary in the search result at all. We have titles, dates, publishers, and authors, but no data summary. In Dryad, we have a series of accordion menus. By default, only one of the search results shows the data summary. Trying to expand the second result will collapse the first one. And Pangaea, a repository of georeference data, is used as the exemplar of Datasite metadata schema. Remember that Datasite recommends having both a summary and methods description listed separately from each other. Well, neither of them appear in the search result page. That's not to say that the summary is always hidden from the search result. Further, the Federated Research Data Repository for Canadian data does show it, and so much more. And open data platforms, including those built on both CCAN and Socrata, do a fantastic job at making the data summaries visible. I wonder if that's because they tend to contain government data and expect more lay users than the previous academic repositories. Although many CCAN repository searches look very different from each other. They include Open Data Canada, Data Nova Scotia, Data.gov, and European Data Portal. They all tend to have the entire summary, or at least a solid excerpt from it, included. And this second screenshot here is from Socrata, which serves the same open data group. So what does this mean in terms of writing a summary? I've spoken to a few data management groups about user experience in search, and there's some debate over how useful the data summary truly is. A few people have told me that the summary is the last metadata field they look at, so it wouldn't make sense to feature it prominently. So keep this in mind for the end of the presentation, and I'd like to hear your thoughts. But it does mean that relative to other forms of media, we have less experience reading data summaries than we do other types of summaries. If data creators have little experience reading the summaries of other data sets, how can researchers be expected to write effective summaries themselves? And a third observation, with what we have, what do data summaries end up looking like? When we look at the landing page of a data deposit, we expect to see a summary, a description, abstract, whatever we're calling it for that one, that describes the data set. An incredible amount of deposits don't do that. The screenshot that you're looking at now shows the abstract for a scholarly article that has been copied and pasted into the summary field of its supplemental data. In fact, if we look at the DataSite Metadata Standards Guide again and follow the example link for the abstract there, we see this summary for the dataset. And to follow the this is supplement to link, we can see that that abstract has also been copied into the dataset summary. So when I saw this, I questioned the intended purpose of the dataset. And I took an in-depth look at Data Dryad with a sample of 338 datasets and Figshare with a sample of 350, and found that 95.3% of Data Dryad datasets use the same summary from the article that they're associated with. And that's also true for 29.1% of Figshare. So normally we think of common convention as being best practice to stay within expectations. But if our purpose is to describe data, a scholarly article's abstract isn't explicitly doing that. And although Figshare's number of copied summaries is lower than Dryad, it's still quite a high number. Which isn't to say that the other summaries were good. So distilling some best practices. There's a lot of literature out there for abstracting scholarly literature and prose. There's also a lot of principles which are designed to facilitate search, from library catalogs to archives to websites. Themes can be extracted from these resources, such as the convenience of the searcher takes precedence. So I'm proposing a list of best practices to kickstart a discussion. First, that datasets should be described with attention to the searcher. When presented with a summary, a searcher may want to know two things. Is it useful to them, and are they able to use the data? To determine whether a resource is useful, a searcher should be able to identify whether data are relevant to their needs. They'll have a scope for their search that overlaps with one or more dimensions of the data set. I'm working largely with environmental data, so the dimensions will almost always include geospatial, the location of where data were collected, temporal, the date range that the data cover, and the subject. Depending on the data, I'm sure there may be more. To determine whether a resource can be used, a searcher should be able to identify the extent to which data have been processed and the format the data are in. We're generally trying, the second concept here, description should begin as being appropriate for all potential audiences. We're generally trying to encourage the reuse of data. This can be difficult where data sets are used across disciplines and terminology isn't shared. Where it's possible to describe your data without jargon, I'd suggest beginning with an impact statement of why your data are important and going into more detail the further you read on in the summary. A third concept for consideration, data sets should be described as independent objects. Consider the issues of copying a scholarly abstract. It shows the conclusion of your study, inflicting a bias without letting the new user explore the data within their own framework. The summary should also stand independently from other metadata fields. I shouldn't need to check another field, be it title or geolocation, to understand the overall contents of a data set. Another concept, the context of data creation must be described. While data sets should be considered independent from their study, they're not created in a vacuum. Understanding the original context for creation is necessary for evaluating integrity and inherent biases. This concept is widely agreed upon through the literature and is also useful for searchers who would benefit from knowing the completeness of the data or the degree to which it's been processed. And the data set should have structure. In disciplines such as medicine, structured abstracts with consistent headings are considered more readable and help to provide consistency across publications. Normally, these would consist of clearly labeled sections such as background, aims, participants, methods, and results. I'd recommend using a semi-structured summary where, if nothing else, method stands independently from the rest of the description. So these are a proposal for best practices. And to give an example of a data summary that is generally very well written, I've taken one from the CU's data repository. And I'll give you a moment to read that there. And consider, what do you understand of the data set with no other information than that? Now, for the same data set, another summary has been written using the proposed concepts. And I'll give you a few moments to read that as well. So it's structured only by line breaks. It explains what lake sturgeon are, makes no assumption for context. I know when I first came across this data set, I was trying to find where lake sturgeon was on a map as if it were the name of a lake rather than a type of fish. It describes the purpose of the study as they're designated as a threatened species, and the methodology is in its own subsection. So I'd like to open this up for discussion. Jennifer, are you there?
Yes, I am.
I saw a few questions pop up, but I do have a few discussion prompts as well, if we can open this up for people to participate.
Yeah, absolutely. The way this will work is if you have a comment you'd like to make on one of the discussion questions that Dan has, please raise your hand and I can unmute you. And I can start off with the question in the Q&A if you'd like, just because we have it there.
Sure.
So a very interesting question. Can you comment whether it's the copy and pasting of the data summary and the article abstract into the repository summary field would be considered plagiarism in the research community?
I'm not sure if I'd have a comment to that. I'd encourage people to join in the chat as well. Because both the data set and the abstract, the scholarly article are so closely linked, I'd be inclined to say no, but that still doesn't make it useful as a tool for search for the data. Anyone who's searching for the data in the context of wanting the same information that's in the scholarly article is likely to find that as well.
Mm-hmm. We had a suggestion from Robin Stobbs that it might be self-plagiarism. And another suggestion that I wouldn't have thought of it as plagiarism. You are quoting, extracting from the work, so.
So the discussion prompts I have here is how do you use the summary fields when searching for data? And is it different than other types of search? Do you go to the data summary first or later in your process?
If you have an answer that you'd like to give, please raise your hand and I can allow you to talk. Or you can use the chat as well, as Beth has pointed out. I mean, I can say something here, and I'll be honest in that I don't necessarily search with summary fields in mind. I kind of use them as an extension to my original keyword, I guess, search or subject heading type search. Now, I don't know if that's the best way to do it, but for me, I would come to it and say, oh, okay, now that I have this summary, I can look and see how much this actually matches what I have in mind trying to find with these keywords. But again, I don't know that that's necessarily the best way to be doing it.
I think
Krisha.
that's, oh,
Oh, yeah, no, I agree with what you said there, Jen. I think that typically I've used it when searching, you know, you do your keyword search, but I think that I always look quite quickly to the data summary to understand the context that Dan described there, and just from the slides there, the difference in having that parsing out of the different steps, the methodology and the context, that would certainly make that process much easier, because sometimes you are looking through and it can also be very general, so then you have to dig even deeper and you know, download things, and so I think that that I do use it fairly early on in the process, and I like those that summary of how to make it more readable. Thanks.
and Krisha, at the beginning where you identified as either librarian, data specialist, or researcher, which category did you put yourself in?
I'm actually, I missed that part, so apologies.
Oh, yep.
But I'm a data manager and I support researchers at Global Water Futures. And I've also done some work previously where I've been searching for relevant data sets. So
Okay.
mostly like government data sets and other similar environmental type data. So
Thank you. I'd like to encourage people who are new to searching for data to participate in this as well, because your experience is, I think, a common experience, but one that many people aren't comfortable voicing.
Now, I know Kathy is not new to searching for material, but Kathy, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I search like I search for articles. Throw in some keywords, look at the titles of the data sets, and then I'll look at the summary. Like after I chose a few choice records to look at, to consider, I'll look at the summaries and then use that as my next like vetting tool, so to speak. So it's kind of the middle of the search process, and I do like the suggested best practices. The end.
Thank you. I wonder, when you're picking out your choice selection, which fields are you more likely to be looking at?
I'll judge by the title and actually the summary. Yeah, the summary. Oh, I may have voiced that incorrectly. Yeah, titles first and then summaries.
Are there other, what sort of data are you looking for when you're looking?
Oof.
Would there be, you know, georeference, or would there be?
Oh no, it's more like a data set. Like what are the gauge readings of the Ganges River in 1972? Yeah.
Thank you.
Krisha, you can speak.
Oh, okay, thanks. I was just going to say, I do find space, like, because the work that I'm involved in is like watershed based, it's very locationally tied, and so I find geospatial searching very helpful. And I've also had you know, I know with with the Canada Open Data, I've had some discussions with people in different areas that are looking at water, and we've had conversations about how people look for data in terms of like searching on a website, but not kind of like starting out looking at context based. So whether you're looking at groundwater, so just even before getting into a portal, and I found that kind of a so I guess my point is just that there is quite a bit of interest in people creating these portals to figure out how people are doing these searches, you know, and how to best build the search, like the portal and the engine to facilitate finding the data, because we have like a lot of researchers are looking for water quality data, which is very dispersed amongst different jurisdictions and you know, obviously geographically dispersed, and so it is quite interesting to look at how people are searching for data. I guess that's a total tangent, but anyway, I appreciate this conversation.
Yeah, no, identifying the dimensions so that they can be searched separately without the summary, but also the summary to supplement it.
Yeah, I think the summary is where you really get the, you know, sometimes it's easy to find, you know, data sets, but there might not be the right ones. And I think the data summary is completely what, you know, is going to help you determine that.
All right, should I move to the next discussion prompt?
Absolutely.
What issues haven't been addressed? Are they a problem? So some things that I can see haven't been addressed is you can have one data summary that has just a couple of words describing it. So you can have one that runs on for several paragraphs. So there's no consistent length. What do you do with data that isn't useful in an interdisciplinary context? Do you still write in a simpler fashion? And what is the relationship between the summary and other metadata fields? And for this question, it might be useful if I pull back up the best practices here. So what guidance would you like to see that you're not seeing out of this?
I can start again. I find that the beginning is appropriate to all potential audiences is really interesting, because I think it's useful both within disciplines and across disciplines, because within disciplines, potential audiences are often quite broad. So I think it's always useful to keep in mind what kinds of jargon are being used, and you know, what kinds of assumptions are being made. But I think it may also depend on the repository that you're using. If you're putting something into a very discipline-specific repository, you may not have to be quite as broad and non-discipline specific as you might have to if you're putting something, say, into Google Datasets. Oh, and that has prompted a thought from Chantel. Chantel, you have the ability to talk.
Hi, Jen. Thank you very much. I think that's a really good thought for sure, but I want to expand on it a little bit, saying that even if it is a domain-specific repository, I know that with FERDR, the Federation of Data and Repositories has kind of shifted that way of thinking. So even if it is a discipline-specific repository, there is a chance in the future that it is available to a wider community. And so if we want to be more innovative and more interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, whatever the new buzzword is, then we should have from the very beginning try to make that accessible to all of the users that are potential in the future. So spell out acronyms, try to be as clear as possible. I know it's not possible to be completely clear when you're in like deep in the scientific data of it all, but at least try. So yeah, thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a great point.
One of the things I said during that slide was, if it's not possible to speak in more general terms, speak about the impact of why this research is important, or why the data may be important, so that they know whether it's worth learning the more technical language.
I think it also may speak to things that we see. I mean, I'm thinking of dissertations at UBC where I did mine, where there's now a requirement to have both an abstract, a technical abstract, but also a lay summary. And, you know, is that maybe a direction that that things should be going in. We've got an interesting comment here from Melissa Cuthill, and I'm just going to reshare this with everyone, which is that there's a friction between cater to the searcher, which is your audience in that specific platform, and should be appropriate to all audiences. And I think friction is a good word for it.
That's a good point. Who is the searcher?
Yeah.
Pardon me, as I jot down notes.
No, that's great. This is, we're all looking to see how this goes forward. I think everybody here will be really interested to see what the results of this are. So if we know we've contributed to further thoughts, that's great. Kathy, you can speak.
Thanks. Yeah, I like the idea of the lay summary, and that sort of feeds into who is the searcher. I wish I could remember better, but I was at a conference where there was some scientific academic data set about some waters off of the coast of Australia, and it turns out some surfer dudes ended up using it to catch the best waves at the best time of the year. So who would have thunk a bunch of surfers were going to use this other quote academic data? So we don't know who our audience or searcher might be.
I remember that. I kind of think that's, you know, I think that's what we're hoping to achieve.
Yeah.
Krisha?
I was just going to add, I think that's a really cool example, actually. But I was just going to say that I think that there's a really big push for scientific or research-related knowledge to be pushed into, you know, the public and to be more accessible to people. Like, we have a lot going on at Global Water Futures in knowledge mobilization, and it's all about getting, you know, the scientific message or the academic message to a broader audience, so that, you know, to see applicability in you know, other areas. So I think that I totally understand the friction, but I think that it's an excellent thing to be promoting and to be normalizing, is to reduce that friction. And so that's all. Thanks.
We've got another comment from Melissa here, which is that the first thing they hammer into you in library school is that you can't design services like classification or search to be all things to all people. So I'm wary of that. Kathy?
Well, working on my computer science degree, they taught us you have to make the GUI applicable to everybody. It should be easy for the expert and easy for the beginner. So back to that friction thing and a lay, and we got to find a way around that, because we will have all sorts of users, I think.
Yeah.
There was also the idea that you could have multiple summaries for the same data set. You could have one that's designed for the layperson and one designed for the expert, which actually feeds into the final discussion prompt I have, is how would these concepts impact practice? And would that be a work burden that no one's prepared for? Or is that a reasonable thing to expect of the person who created the data set?
Chantal, you have a thought?
Yeah, I just wanted to expand on what was just said about, I think it was by Kathy, or no, the person after. So I know that it's something that that it's not possible to cater to everybody, but I think that it's worth at least trying to make it clear to lay people. And then, like, abstracts and descriptions, I know from my experience with repositories, they aren't short. They have like between 2,000 and 3,000 characters sort of thing. So you have a little bit more room to move. So maybe start off with the more general understanding and then go into the more specific. Kind of a balancing act, but I understand that academia is where we're at, but innovation isn't just specific to academia. It requires a little bit more. So yeah, just keeping in mind that, yeah, you can't make everybody happy at once, but at least trying to at the beginning and then being more specific. I think that would be a good practice.
Yeah. Kathy, you had something as well?
Yeah, it could potentially be a burden, but it seems things are shifting. There are certainly some medical journals who are requiring a layperson abstract for a journal article. There's movement afoot to make medical data easier for the layperson to understand. I'm thinking of these 3M competitions and other your three-minute thesis
3MT,
to the general. Yeah. So I think, yeah, it is extra work right now, but there's a generation that's learning to communicate their research to the general public. So it's a coming down the pike. I think it's a great idea.
Oh, I look forward to seeing all the 3-minute thesis on TikTok.
Yeah.
So
Let's go
then
on
there's
with the
another.
dance your thesis, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Oh gosh. That also leads into a question of if so many data summaries as they are right now are taken directly from the abstract of an associated article, as we move away from that, because I'm assuming we want to move away from that, our best practices can evolve once we see what naturally develops. So whatever comes from the study that I'm doing and what I'm sure other people are looking at, it won't be the final draft.
Mm-hmm. I'm sad that we don't have our curation coordinator, Erin, here on the call, because I'm sure she'd be very interested to talk about the role of data curators in helping this process along. If there would be a role of data curators in helping this process along. But if there's anyone on this call who wants to speak to that, Kathy?
Well, funny you say that. For our Dataverse instant, like up until basically now, it's been a free for all, and people are depositing their data. But I'm looking at the records, and they're all crap. So we're going to do some. We're going to start curating these data sets, and I'm looking at the description fields, and I never have good advice to offer, but this is all making good, or not, yeah, this is all making sense. And my point, yes, I am going to use this as a good starting place to if somebody has a bad description or no description, which certainly does happen, to suggest to people to use this. Maybe it's evolving, but it's certainly a great starting place, and it certainly makes sense to me. It covers stuff that I've thought about. I've never thought about it in a package like this, but it all makes sense, and I like it. So it's going to be useful to me. It's all I got to say.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear it.
I note that we do have a couple of our new curation officers on this call, but I won't put them on the spot at this point. But I'm sure they're absorbing all of this information and working it into their practice.
Mm.
Yeah, and a couple of other good points that came up in the chat. Kim from Meridian has suggested that I'd argue that the ones who benefit the most frequently from you sharing your data are those who are in similar or closely related disciplines, and therefore probably ought to be the primary audience. However, the more general or public you can make your descriptions, whether through careful writing or by giving additional context, e.g. through references or some other methodology, the more likely it is that serendipitous usage will occur, which is a good point. And one from Marie Schellenberg as well, and experts understand easy language, but not vice versa.
There was a good example article that spoke about two problems classified from the user's perspective. The third last one on this see also list. If anyone wants to read more about two disciplines working on the same project, I remember that one being particularly good.
Mm-hmm. And I'll note that we will be sharing these slides with everyone after the webinar. And the video will be up on YouTube as well if you want to go back and revisit this discussion or share it with others.
All right, if you had any feedback that you didn't want to share publicly, if you have comments of, oh no, that concept there is a terrible idea and you didn't want to voice that here, feel free to email me. I can be reached at dphillips, DPHILLIPS @dal.ca.
And I will be copying Dan when we send out the slides to everyone. So you will have his email address there as well. But
Okay.
he will not have all of yours. Are there any further questions at this time? All right, well, it seems like we've reached a lull in the discussion for now, but I have a feeling this will be continuing on in different venues for a while, and I'll be very interested to see how it develops. So I will say thank you very much to all of you for coming, and thank you, Dan, for really opening up some really interesting questions, and we're all looking forward to seeing how your work develops. You know, we'll be looking for the paper when it's out.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. All right.
All right, and a reminder to everyone, we will have another webinar coming up a week from today on using the Cuisinart and Casper systems in the global water futures, and we'll be having webinars continuing on throughout the rest of the year. We're looking forward to seeing as many of you as possible at all of them, and have a great rest of your day.